Good afternoon and welcome to day 6 and the start of the second week of the EuRA Spring Summit. I'm Simon Robbins and I'm the Business Development Director of Is Gqs and Relocation and a EuRA board member, and more importantly, I'm your pilot for today. This second week is packed with great informative sessions. Today, got to get it right, we look at contracts. Tuesday, long-term impact of COVID on global migration. Wednesday, move management. Thursday, RMC DSP Forum. Friday, the RFP process, followed by our closing speaker, the inspirational John Harmon. Following John, the board invite you to join us for Until We Meet Again with a glass of something. I'd like to thank our app sponsors, Dwellworks, and our daily sponsor, ICANN Relocation.
Relocation unravels on personal, professional, and socio-cultural levels.
Our vision as promoters was to create an effective, lean and fast-moving company with inherent core values of integrity, commitment and transparency. This ensures maximum customer value creation through constant innovation.
We have over 2 decades of experience and an all-India coverage through 7 offices. We also have coverage in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal and Maldives.
ICANN のスタッフは多言語を話し、国際的な文化に理解をしております。
ICANN strives to ensure a customer satisfaction rate of over 95% through employee KPIs which are linked to customer value creation.
We focus on creating cutting-edge technology to enhance transferee and client experience.
With iNavigate, which is our proprietary tool, we leverage technology to create a 360-degree solution for all stakeholders.
iTrack securely stores important documents for easy access and tracks assignments progress, visa and lease expiries.
iTrack is able to generate many value-added reports for our clients. Its unique application programming interface allows data to integrate with various RMC systems.
iTrack has a unique feature to enable customized digital welcome kits.
iTour creates virtual tours giving the transferee customized maps along with the landmarks of interest,
Distance markers, exhaustive property details and a provision to leave comments.
Die Steuerung einer Relocation nach Indien ist aufwendig und benötigt viel Erfahrung, Sachverstand und Einsatz. Genau aus diesem Grund arbeiten wir seit vielen Jahren mit ICANN Relocation zusammen.
ICANN was the first company in India to have achieved an Is Gqs certification along with an ISO 9001-2015.
For our Indian customers, we're able to offer the best-in-class services anywhere in the world through our global network partnerships. Our work consistently wins recognition. ICANN's service strategy is based on the trinity
Of quality and continual improvement.
innovation,
And people.
Thank you. What a great video there. Rohit Kumar has asked me to pass on his deepest thanks to the global mobility community in supporting a truly great cause of raising money to purchase an oxygen generator and install it in a rural Indian mid-sized hospital to ensure supply of oxygen not only for the hospital but for the patients being cared for at home within a 20-kilometre radius. To this date, this initiative has raised over 500,000 rupees, and thank you very much for all your generosity. In this time of uncertainty, it's good to know that some things are certain, like contracts with your clients. In today's session, the panel will be looking at practical things a relocation business can do to minimise the risks of failing to comply with contractual terms, as well as those terms that are deemed unreasonable. Our Ignite later by Jeremy Berthoux, who blew us away when we were all together last in Munich. I'd now like to welcome Gordon Kerr, EuRA Strategic Consultant for Legal Affairs, as our moderator for today's important session. Hello, Gordon.
Hello, Simon. Thank you very much for that introduction. So in this session, we are going to talk about contracts. And these are the contracts that we have across our industry. We have contracts with suppliers, we have them with consultants, we have them, of course, with clients. And then we have within that contracts between RMCs and DSPs, for example. One thing is they're getting complicated, they're getting longer. Sometimes that's due to legislation. like the GDPR, which added some new contract clauses into virtually all relocation contracts. And then we get additional clauses added in by legal departments. But unfortunately, legal departments are very good at adding clauses in. They're not so good at reducing clauses later on, so contracts just get longer and longer. Anyway, to help us understand how best to deal with contracts, we've got some great speakers today. In part one of the session, we have firstly Martina Sharway, who is EuRA's strategic consultant for quality. And Martina will be looking at contracts very much through the lens of EuRA's Global Quality Seal. And Martina will be followed by Meredith Kennedy, Global Account Management, Vice President of Global Account Management at Dwellworks, talking about how her organization scrutinizes and rolls out new contracts. And then in part two of our session, I'll be in discussion with, if I could call them the three grumpy men. Not three grumpy old men, there's no ageism in this session, but we're talking about the contract clauses that really annoy them and what they try to do about it. Now, the grumpy men in question are, firstly, we'll have Steve Burson, CEO with Relo Network Asia. Steve will be followed by Stuart McAllister, Managing Director of Inter Relocation Group. And lastly, Adrian Leach, Director of HCR Group. Now, please feel free to fire any questions our way using the Whova app. And I'll be trying to keep an eye on the chat function in the app as our session progresses. So let's kick off with Martina. What does the Global Quality Seal have to say about complying with contracts, Martina?
Yeah, hi, have a warm welcome to everyone. I think, Minnie, you might share the slides, please. Thank you so much. Development, implementation, and continuous adjustment and improvement of a quality management system based on the requirements of the Global Quality Seal Plus standard supports definitely DSPs and all the associated companies in implementing the legal and contractual requirements. Yeah, not only on the contract side, but there are a lot of legal requirements as well, so you don't need really a contract about that. For example, as Gordon said before, so data security stuff. In addition to the numerous internal policies to be determined and implemented, such as data protection, integrity and information security policy, health and safety policy, the application of the other requirements of the Gqs Plus ensure that the DSP work in a compliant manner. For example, this includes the training requirements and background checks for employees and consultants. This is already required by the Global Quality Seal. The achievement of quality objectives and KPIs, which are set, but also the implemented complaint management and the handling of service failures and necessary corrective action. So all this assures a good framework, a good background to be compliant with legal and contractual requirements. Next slide, please. Thank you. The aim of the requirements of the Global Quality Seal Plus, the Chapter 4.1 service contract, it must be avoided there's a disagreement about the scope of the service to be provided between the client, contractor, and the transferee. And this can be avoided by implementing the minimum requirements for service contracts between DSP and direct customers or IMCs. And this is, again, those are requirements based and stated in the Global Quality Seal standard. For example, description of services to be delivered, schedule of fees, payment, terms and conditions, the communication channels, the correct contact persons, the rights and duties of both parties or of all parties who are in the contract, the complete client, supplier, and external partner data. To achieve a successful relocation for all contracting parties, communication, again, is an important success factor. And this is another requirement in another chapter in the Global Quality Seal standard. Especially proactive communication with clients and customers. For example, in a case of a service failure, or if there occur potential barriers to successful relocation service, or when service requirements change and or increase after the service delivery begun. So you have the view onto the legal part and the contractual part on contracts from very different sides and views by the Global Quality Seal. Next slide, please. Thank you. And dealing with service failures is another requirement of the Global Quality Seal Plus. And this helps identify and analyze irregularities in the provision of the service, and thus the introduction of appropriate corrective measures. So we are working in a day-to-day business, and of course, service failures will occur and will happen. But in order or to ensure to minimize the risk of being non-compliant, it is important to deal with such service failures. So this is just a short wrap-up about requirements connected to minimize the risk of being non-compliant. And thank you. Back to you, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Martina. Yeah, I think the Global Quality Seal has such an important role to play in making sure we are contractually compliant, and it's very well structured for that. So thanks very much for that, Martina. Let me move on now from, into a larger organization and how a large organization with a legal department looked at contracts. So Meredith, how does your organization, a larger relocation business, go about the task of scrutinizing new contracts?
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Thanks for having me, and hello, everyone. We are lucky enough to be a large destination services company and a global corporate housing provider. And so we're lucky enough to have actually a 3-person in-house legal team. So I'll talk a little bit about we have a legal counsel, an associate counsel, and a manager of legal operations. But it all starts with the business. It's about, making sure that the first thing that legal team is going to be doing is talking to the business owner, making sure that the contract really reflects what our original intentions of the contract or the arrangement with our client had been. And then we do have some really nice standard practices that I think apply no matter what size of supplier you may be. First of all, we have a best practices checklist. So contracts might come to us and they're missing certain clauses that we're very used to having to adhere to. Again, the keyword Martina brought up, compliance. We want to make sure that we're being compliant, and we have standards that we've set for our business to adhere to those compliance requirements. And so sometimes things are just missing. That's the first thing we're going to do, is check your contract against our checklist. And so that can all be done with our operations leader. And then she's going to send it on to actually either our associate counsel or our chief legal counsel for the actual redlining. And I'll get into a few details about what they might be specifically looking for in a slide or two. But from a process perspective, what happens next is that the executed contracts get saved in a shared folder. We're currently using Teams for that. And then that can be accessed not just by the legal team, but also by the whole account team. You can imagine that the account team, sometimes a question comes up or something happens. And instead of reading, as you said, Gordon, these contracts can get awfully lengthy. Instead of reading a 20 or 30 page master service agreement, we love going to the snapshot that that gets created for us. So a quick snapshot that has a summary of some of the key terms and maybe some of the notable anomalies that are, you know, a little bit different about this contract than what we might be used to are summarized for us. And then also the legal team does have a shared calendar where they put all expiration dates, notice dates, all of that, so that we keep up with those. So on the next slide, I think the thing that our legal team does talk about is that we recognize the position that we're in is maybe a luxury that we have this legal team. And a lot of our contracts are sent to us have not been drafted by a lawyer. In fact, we would estimate maybe half are not drafted by a lawyer. They're instead created by supply chain, by procurement, maybe by owner operators. And often one of the tasks, one of the methods that they're going to use to create that contract is by grabbing clauses and things from past contracts, which makes a lot of sense. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Over time, our terms and conditions really haven't changed all that much. But what gets challenging about that is sometimes they're copying and pasting from a few different sources. And then it could get a little bit confusing at best, honestly. At worst, it actually contradicts. It's in conflict. Something from one contract is written a little bit different than in another, and now we have some contradiction. So our legal team's always looking for those things. The other thing they're always on the lookout for is just to make sure that terms are defined very straightforward, that this makes sense. An example might be, you know, Dwellworks is called the supplier, the supplier, the supplier, the supplier, and then it gets to payment terms and it talks about how our client's going to pay their partner. Well, it's going to behoove us to make sure that we're also called the supplier there. If we have any challenge with payment terms later, we want to make sure that we're referring to the same party and there's no way that they can question what their intent of that clause might have been. So making sure that those terms are used consistently and that they're defined up front is really critical to us. And then the other thing, and this may seem simple, but I think it's really important, it's often that we get these contracts that refers to an amendment. So we're agreeing to an amendment that's actually not included. I don't understand how people sign that, but it does happen. And we're very, very careful that we just can't agree to something that we haven't actually seen and reviewed. So we are always flagging that to our clients as well. And on the next slide, I thought I'd get into just a few examples of a few clauses that we pay particular attention to. And Gordon, I think you and the grumpy men are going to get into some more detail about this. So I just thought I'd hit kind of a couple key points on each of these. So the first one, alternative dispute resolution. And the reason I bring this up is, first of all, we don't intend for there to be a challenge. But the contract needs to be written in a way that we are writing for a lawyer or a judge. And so we are very, very careful about some of these highly litigated kind of clauses. On the other hand, we would prefer that things not go to litigation. So obviously engaging a lawyer is more expensive and can be more time consuming. We tend to do something like have the two parties who, again, we're partners. That's a client that we've come into business to on good terms. It's very likely that we're going to be able to resolve this amongst ourselves. So we often do something where the two parties have 30 days to come to terms together and then are compelled, are compelled to binding arbitration after that. We are very careful that the location of that binding arbitration is in our location if we're the client and this is a supplier agreement. And also we recognize that if we're the supplier, the location for this is going to be where the prime contractor is or where the RMC or client is located, and we're agreeable to that. And confidentiality, I would mention two things. One, of course, that's going to be pretty broad, but it also needs to be specific to some degree. We're not going to agree or be caught because we didn't have a voicemail about an appointment from 6 years ago archived. That's not, what we need to be keeping in confidence. What we want to be doing is making sure that the confidentiality is mutual. And every once in a while, we get a little pushback from clients on that saying, well, we're the ones that hold the confidential information. What would you have that's confidential? Well, our banking information we're providing to you, our subcontractors are an asset to us that are confidential to you. And I think maybe one of the more interesting things is that we like to get into some very strategic conversations with our clients. And if the confidentiality agreement is strong enough, then we don't need an independent non-disclosure agreement every time we have those kinds of conversations. So that's a nice benefit to being careful there. On indemnification, I just want to say that we would not indemnify a third party. We feel strongly that the agreement is between the contractor, the two parties being contracted, the client and the supplier. So every once in a while that's asked for, and that's not something that we tend to agree to. On the limitation of liability, we do understand compliance. We are comfortable being accountable, but we are going to exempt conjecture. So what I mean by that is that we're not going to pay for your projection of potential loss based on our neglect. So that's something that we're always looking out for as well. And GDPR, I think, Gordon, you were alluding to this a little bit, but back in 2018, when that was launched, we were seeing 20 and 30-page addendums related to GDPR. I think it was because it was so new, there was a lot that needed to be defined. And we're just seeing, I would say in the last few months, a change where that's becoming more brief. We don't need to define everything about GDPR. If you're a processor and we're a sub-processor, those are probably the two definitions that need to be a part of our agreement with each other. And so we're seeing those terms be shortened, maybe from 20 pages all the way down to 10. So pretty substantial. And again, we're reviewing that carefully, but we're comfortable with that. So that's something I'd be on the lookout for, and maybe something we can all celebrate together. And then the last thing I did want to mention, it kind of brings us full circle to the beginning, is that while, again, we're lucky and privileged to have this legal team, our legal team does not work in a silo. It's very important. Things like scope of work, service level agreements, key performance indicators, fees and payment are not going to be decided and agreed upon by our legal team. They always engage the business. We're going to know better what we're actually trying to accomplish, what's reasonable to agree to. And the business would be our operations team, but also don't forget your supply chain management team, your accounting team. All of those different parties have a vested interest in making sure we're agreeing to something that is reasonable. So that is, I think, best practices from DwellWorks. Gordon, I hope that's helpful to kickstart the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, that is so helpful, Meredith, and seeing it in that very practical way of both the process you're going through and what you're looking out for. I mean, a few points I picked up there, and it's funny you mentioned the copy and paste problem, because certainly in the UK, that is a huge problem. And, I've looked at relocation contracts where there are clauses in there that relate to outsourced catering services, and another one which had outsourced cleaning services. And it's like whoever in procurement is dealing with contracts has thought, oh, we'll use the last one and we just need to change a few bits. And they don't change enough bits, and you just get complete nonsense. And obviously they're quite embarrassed when you go back, but it does show you have to read them. Otherwise you end up providing cleaning services as well as relocation services to the new client. Also, the interesting about avoiding court action by the 30-day clause to reach agreement and then potentially arbitration. That's very interesting for EuRA just now, because you may know we've just launched a mediation service, and that's very much about avoiding disputes going to court and helping EuRA members by having a mediation service. So we'll perhaps see that being built into contracts in the future.
I think that's fantastic. Yeah, great.
And just one final thing I picked up, the point about the confidentiality clause being mutual, and this would apply to quite a few other clauses, and I'm sure we'll come on to it. The idea that if I'm being asked to enter an obligation, I'm happier if the the person on the other side has a similar obligation. And so confidentiality is a kind of classic, where if I'm expected to look after things in confidence, then so should the party on the other side. So these are all great points. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, let's move on now to the things we don't like in contracts. And we're going to start with Steve. I'm sorry about being rude about you earlier. I don't think you're grumpy at all, Steve. I like the two other guys. What are the contract clauses you really don't like, and why?
Thank you. Maybe I can just preface it. I'm speaking mainly from the point of view of a DSP who works quite a lot with relocation management companies. So I'm kind of coming at things from that perspective with contracts between us, a DSP, and an RMC. So there's four things mainly I was going to bring up today. So the first one is indemnity clauses, kind of similar to the confidentiality you were just talking about now. But I really do not like seeing indemnity clauses that indemnify the RMC, but then don't indemnify us if there's negligence the other way around. So I was kind of thinking of an example of this today, and if you can consider the Myanmar as a location before the coup, we've done a lot of work in Myanmar, but there are a lot of stray dogs in Myanmar, for example. Now, if it was an RMC's role to tell the client that they needed to get a rabies shot before they went to Myanmar, then if that didn't happen and they went to Myanmar and got bitten by a dog and were threatened, in what could be a life or death situation, that's the type of thing that I'd like to be indemnified from, because it wasn't my fault that that they didn't have that conversation about that rabies vaccination, because that wasn't my role as a DSP. Okay, so I just think it's fair that if we are to be, if they are indemnifying themselves, if we are negligent, then I would like the RMC to have the same clause the other way around. And that is typically something that I point out in a lot of the contracts that we see. The second one is IP related, so intellectual property. Things like welcome packages, lots of information on local information that we provide. We have no problem providing it, but that information has been curated by us and it's ours. It's not somebody else's, and sometimes in contracts you'll notice that there are clauses that are put in there to say that your IP information, your IP becomes ours. And so to look out for those clauses, because I truly believe that that IP is mine. It's nobody else's. So that's another one I look out for. The third thing, I do not like being held to foreign exchange risk. So when an RMC comes to me and says, "Can you fix this contract for 3 years in a currency that is not my currency?" then I need to make sure that there's flexibility within that to change the rates that we charge if there is a significant fluctuation in the foreign exchange rate, because I do not believe that the little guy at the end of the supply chain should be the one that has to manage the foreign exchange risk. I actually think that's the corporation that should be held responsible for that. If the RMC wants to take on that foreign exchange rate risk, then fine. But I don't think it's fair that the little guy at the end of the supply chain gets to handle that. And then the fourth thing that comes up sometimes it's stipulated in contracts, sometimes they don't stipulate it and then tell you later, is around payment terms, and I think somebody else is going to talk about these a little bit later. But there are some RMCs who will not pay you until they get paid. And so they'll have a 45-day or a 60-day, payment terms in your contract, but then tell you that they can't actually pay it until the client pays them. And quite often that is not stipulated in the contract, but they tell you afterwards. So something that you need to look out for as well, because I don't believe that is fair either. I mean, you know, we have terms with you in the contract, you have terms with your client, but you know what terms you have with your client is not really, you know, my business, right? So so those are the, you know, those are four things that that quite often come up when I'm checking contracts. And thank you, Meredith, for your handy tips. There were some good points in there today. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. Again, it's great to get such practical examples of things that, you know, we need to focus on. I think indemnity clauses, it seems to be a growing problem because they seem to be getting broader, and people are getting angrier about them, and people are getting into litigation about them because it can be a relatively small fee you're being paid. It may be part of an immigration process where you're just posting some documents, something goes wrong, and the claim can be thousands of pounds, euros, dollars, out of all proportion to the service you're providing. So these clauses do have to be looked at carefully, narrowed down wherever possible, you know, maybe limiting it to in relation to the fees that are earned, or certainly limiting it in terms of your insurance coverage. But that then involves bringing your insurance broker in, checking are they happy with that clause, and you know, often you just don't have the time to do that kind of ideal preparation. But I know that EuRA have had a number of concerns expressed to them by members about indemnity clauses. So I suspect we'll talk more about that. But I think in future we certainly will have a session which will include indemnity clauses specifically. And yeah, the point you made about this clause that I've seen actually more in moving contracts and relocation contracts, but where the client is saying, we will pay you within 45 days or such later date as we receive payment from client. And it's almost like sneaked in there. You know, so you focus on the 45 days, but it's the words that follow that can completely screw your cash flow. So that's not a nice one. Steve, before I move on to Stuart, any thoughts on, I mean, how successful are you in when you go back on these clauses, or when you're, you know, do you have any tactics you use to try and get unfair, unreasonable clauses deleted, changed?
I typically go back. I'm not afraid to go back once or twice to try to push things, but then, you know, sometimes the other party will come back and say, no, our legal department doesn't want to change that, and then it's a case of, well, how much do I want this business? You know, is it, you know, and what is my perceived risk here? You know, because we don't really get into contractual issues that often, right? So, you know, we need to be careful for, you know, when something does happen, you know, these things become important. But how often do these things happen is you know, quite often the thing you need to consider, and how, you know, how badly would I like to work with that, you know, with that party. You know, so sometimes I'm successful. Yeah, it really depends. It can just be something like crossing out, you know, a few lines in a contract, and signing it, and you know, initialing it and sending it back and seeing if it passes. You know, but
that's a great tip.
It comes down a lot of the time to, you know, what sort of risk do you perceive as a business owner, and sometimes you just have to, you know, in order to you know, facilitate getting the business, sometimes you just need to sign the contract and continue on.
Yeah, one tip I would throw in, it sometimes works, if a client comes back and says, well, these are absolutely part of our standard terms and conditions, and you're saying, well, they're not really applicable to this service, or can we have a bit of flexibility? Is to say, okay, we'll sign up to your standard terms and conditions, but can you provide us with a side letter saying you won't enforce it against us, in these circumstances? So sometimes it's easier to get a side letter, an informal letter, than it is to change an absolutely rigid standard contract. But again, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
That's a really good point. Yeah, or special conditions at the end of the contract or something like that. Yeah,
yeah.
Sometimes can be done.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to bring in Stuart now. Stuart, any unfair clauses that you would add to Steve's list? I feel we're going to end up with a burgeoning list of unfair clauses by the end of this session. You're on mute, Stuart.
There's always one, isn't there?
Yeah, there's always one.
Hello, everybody. I'm even more grumpy now. And worst of all, I'm grumpy at myself. So absolutely, there's a whole range of things. Obviously, Gordon and I had a session within the MIM Plus syllabus where we sit and basically we tried to make it a practical session, but there was a lot of grumping there about various aspects of contracts that we have to deal with. And I'm very much following on from Steve in terms of being a DSP. The vast majority of our contracts are with RMCs and what I would call international partners, which aren't perhaps the behemoth RMCs that we're used to, but also are not direct clients in that respect. And I'm trying to think in the mindset of a smaller DSP, even smaller than our own, in terms of the difficulties that one would experience where you have to deal with and read through a 60, 80, 100+ page contract. So one of the things I've learned, and it's tough, and I'm grateful that I'm a native speaker of English. I can only imagine what it's like for those of our members who are dealing with English as a second language, that the ability to skim, the ability to work, because if I read every word of a 100-page contract, and I get a lot, then I would, well, I don't think I'd have time for much else. So what I tend to do is try and find those key sections where it's not going to be copperplate, where there's the likelihood of things that might be of interest to me and might make me grumpy. So the key sections. Oh, and I wanted to start really by saying Steve's not afraid of pushing back, and I'm not. And maybe the argument would be that, well, that's because we're big and powerful DSPs. We're very, 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 very in a strong position with the industry. Well, yeah, but if you've been in an RFP and you've won the tender, and you didn't have to tick off that you accept the terms and conditions of the contract beforehand, then you've won. There's been a process, so there must be some leeway within reason. And I echo what Steve said about reaching a point where you go, well, what's the likelihood of us ending up in court over this? Do I just sign off on things that don't really work? And I do a similar thing. I've recently had a couple of back and forths with a very large RMC's legal department, and then decided, all right, I'll let some of it go. So what are my main bugbears? Yeah, definitely payment terms. My personal philosophy is I'm not a bank. I wish I were in a financial position to be one. So I'm very much big on saying, okay, well, what happens if you don't pay in time? And of course, a lot of the partners and RMCs we work with go, what do you mean? So, well, if you don't pay within we're giving you, so not only are we completing a process that could take 60, 90, 120 days, during which we're financing that process on behalf of usually a very rich client. At that point, we're going to give you another 30, 45, 60, 90 days of free credit. So I'm already providing interest-free banking services. And then if you don't even honor those terms, I'd like to know that I get something back. And so that's something I tend to push back on. Insurance terms and conditions. I come from a part of the world, or I'm based in a part of the world, where the type of levels of insurance that some RMCs are requesting simply, it's just not a physical possibility. I'll be honest, I struggled with professional indemnity insurance this year to even find a provider that would give us the coverage. I got there, and I could get $1 million, and we went to the RMC partners that we already have and said, look, we can have $1 million. We can't have 5 or 10 or whatever the ridiculous, frankly, number was. And not one has said, well, okay, we can't do business together. Now, I knew, of course, that if I can't get it, I don't imagine any of my competitors could either. But anyway, the key point here is what's reasonably possible within your jurisdiction should be accepted. And I've had, well, can you find better? Because I've tried. So there's also scope for a little pushback. Another one, again, I think echoing what Steve said, and Meredith for that matter, reciprocity. One is on the non-solicitation business, which I thought was related to prostitution, but apparently not. This is where it says we will not hire the staff of the client company or the RMC's client company. And it's okay, but then please don't hire mine. Because I've had a couple of examples of that in the past, where somebody was taken from us, brought in-house, and delivered immigration compliance, for example. That hurts. So yeah, sometimes it's just me being the grumpy middle-aged man I am, and just doing it on general principles. But there's definitely a sense to it. Another one is jurisdiction. This is one that particularly bothers me when we're delivering services in Central and Eastern Europe, and we're being asked for a jurisdiction in the state of Maine, where I've never been and I'm likely to be in the future. And also that if any mediation is required within this contract, that would also take place in the state of Maine, which probably links back to why I need an enormous amount of insurance. So we tend to push back on that. I've had the most positive versions of that, and I've had the least positive. The most positive one was an RMC from the United States that in their draft contract not only stated Hungary as the jurisdiction, but had discovered the correct court of arbitration and had already pre-included that into the terms and conditions of the contract. They got a note of thanks specifically on that topic. And the worst one I've seen recently was a French company hiring us in Hungary and was asking that the jurisdiction be in America. We haven't quite worked out why, and that's live. That's actually ongoing right now. I wish I could give you an answer to that one, but we haven't quite discovered. But we're a fan of the company. We'd love to work with them, but we are querying why a third country not even involved in the invoicing process. And to be honest, maybe Gordon, you'd have a comment on that, but I'm not even sure that's workable. But there it goes. And yeah, one more kind of worst case scenario I've seen was, it relates to referral fees. And it's a reason why reading, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, is a necessity. We had a case with an RMC, well, I would call them an RMC, and they had made no mention of a referral fee or a management fee throughout the negotiation and the pricing. And it was buried into the pricing terms that there would be a 5% referral fee on all business. And well, and I complained about it after having signed the contract without noticing, and sent my first quarterly invoice, and they said, well, it's right there in the contract. So that was a learning experience a few years ago. That contract's still live. I haven't been able to renegotiate it as yet. Oh, and there's one more that tends to come up for me, and that is a GDPR related point. there's often a question about who has to get permission from the customer, the assignee, in terms of sharing their data. And that's one I tend to pay very close attention to. When we have had cases where it was confused as to who was the data controller, processor, and the sub-processor, and our standpoint remains strongly that as a sub-processor, in most cases, it's not our responsibility to get permission to use the data from the assignee, and neither would we do so because it would infer a role that is not ours.
Yeah. Thanks, Stuart. These are all great examples, and I'm surprised you're not even grumpier than you are. You know, now that I know the kind of what you have to put up with. Well, I'm conscious we're 45 minutes into this, and so far we've not had an appearance from Adrian, who will be boiling with indignation back there. So, Adrian, welcome.
Thank you. You've left the oldest and the grumpiest till last, I see, Gordon. Thank you very much. Understandably so. I'm coming at this as an SME. I'm coming at it with direct clients rather than some international partners, but not RMCs as such. And when I look at contracts from some of our clients, they are, well, some of them are just downright ridiculous. And in fact, I'd like to read you, if I may, one of the most ridiculous clauses. And this one is in force majeure, which starts insurrection, civil commotion, war, terrorism, embargo. Pretty normal stuff so far. The occurrence, certified by one of the Centers of Disease Control or successor bodies. We're all thinking pandemic for a moment, of a widespread viral infection transmitted by bites or transmission of bodily fluids that causes human corpses to reanimate and seek to consume living flesh, blood, brain, or nerve tissue, and is likely to result in the fall of organized civilization. And that is a genuine clause in a contract from one of my clients, which is wonderful. And you've got to ask, why did they put it there? And I suspect that part of it was they'd cut and pasted it from Amazon, which is where it appeared originally. And the other one is they probably wonder whether or not anybody's actually reading these contracts in the first place. And that's actually a really important point, because so often we tend to work on the basis of seeking forgiveness rather than trying to find permission in the first place. And that's not necessarily the right way to go. It is interesting that, you know, you see other ones like this, that GameStation put a clause into their software, and how often do we actually read app software or any of those things? But in their one, they put to grant us non-transferable option to claim for now and forevermore your immortal soul. Fantastic stuff, you know, and amazingly, 6,600 people signed that day their immortal soul over to GameStation. Only 900 actually clicked on the opt-out of that particular clause. So, you know, what does it say about people and reading contracts, really? Some of the clients that we've got put in some pretty awkward clauses, but they do it for a very good reason, and you need to think that through. So one of my clients put in, the client shall have the right to terminate the contract or any part thereof at any time by giving 3 months written notice to the supplier. You think it's perfectly reasonable, but this was for a 5-year contract, and there were 11 other reasons why they could terminate the contract. And so when I questioned that, the procurement manager said, well, actually it's an embarrassment clause. It's a break clause. If it turns out that actually you're a rotten shower and our procurement process wasn't very good, we can get out in 3 months and it won't hurt. Obviously, what it doesn't do is allow you, especially if you've got some initial setup costs, to be sorting it all out and amortizing it over a period of 5 years on a fair way, because you just haven't got that opportunity. You know, some of the clauses, well, they just try it on. And I do love this particular one that 2 student renters came up with when they changed their tenancy agreement and the landlord didn't read it. The lessor shall provide birthday cake for the lessees in the weekend closest to their birthdays, which are June 7 and February 17th. Vanilla cake is not acceptable. And guess what? The landlord signed it and had to provide not vanilla cake twice a year to the 2 colleagues who are renting. Marvellous. Some clauses, as I've said, are actually for very good reason. And some of you may know the story of the rock band called Van Halen. You know, they were famous for Jump. And you might have heard of this particular one, but it was very good in their requirements, what they had, their rider, they called it, where they asked for fruit and for hot drinks like coffee and tea and potato chips and Danone yogurts and various other bits and pieces they wanted in there. They wanted M&Ms, but there was a warning, and it said absolutely no brown ones. So that would be a bowl of M&Ms, no brown ones. And when Van Halen turned up at a concert venue, if there were brown ones in the M&M's bowl, they knew that the organizer hadn't read the contract and the small print properly. And Van Halen were famous because they had 850 lights in those days and an awful lot of equipment. And they knew that the chances are the organizer hadn't read how strong the stage has got to be, what the overhead gantry's strength's got to be as well, to take all the equipment, because they'd not looked at the detail. So they then went and checked it far more thoroughly than if there was a bowl there with no brown M&Ms in the contract. So that's what all that was about. There are some downright nasty contract terms that tend to slip past people. And one of them, which is a one I've actually seen, and it's called the gotcha clause. I've got you to pay everything. And it says you will pay the other party's legal costs in the event of a dispute or even if you seek a price increase. Wow. So, you know, that's an expensive one if you really want to try and challenge this contract in any way. And often that will appear in those boilerplate contracts that you can get from document companies that are put in there by people to try and avoid having to write your own contracts. I do see other issues sometimes in contracts that I might push back on. One of them is the publicity clause, and I'm sure you guys might have seen this. You're not allowed to say that you work for a particular client. And, you know, if you're working with a direct client, actually sometimes you want to say, well, actually, that's my client, because strategically you might have priced to win that client on a strategic basis, part of it being the fact that you can announce who that client is because you want to win other clients who rate that particular organization. But if the publicity clause says you can't do anything about it, and you can't say, and you can't cut and paste and use their identity in any way, then actually that's wasted. And the reason why is because of their marketing department are very, very precious about, understandably, about their branding and their brand identity. Another one that hit us, which was about a clause in a contract that said that we had to demonstrate the highest standard of skill and care as would be expected by a professional relocation consultant. So the words here are highest standard. Our professional indemnity insurance, and I know Stuart picked up on this earlier on professional indemnity, was that it would cover somebody who was ordinarily competent in what they were doing. And I had a claim, well, I was going to have a claim against this particular, for this particular client and this particular issue. And the professional indemnity insurers said, no, sorry, we're not going to cover you. So thanks for paying all the premiums, but no, you've signed up to a higher standard than we are covering you for. Thinking of professional indemnity as well, there was a local authority client in the UK that we were seeking to work with. And as a standard on a £70,000 a year contract, so it's quite small, for some specialist accommodation on over 3 years, they wanted professional indemnity insurance for 10 million, any one incident. 10 million. So we went to our insurers and we said, how much is 10 million going to cost us in additional premium? And they said between 50 to 60,000 pounds in premium. Hang on a minute, it's only a £70,000 contract. So, you know, it's ludicrous, isn't it, when you hear things like that along the way. My final thing that I would observe is sometimes we've seen situations where a contract will come out and it will not tell you whether or not the contract terms and conditions supersede the purchase order terms and conditions. And how many times have you seen purchase orders that come out that have got reams of T's and C's attached to them, usually motor companies in particular, because that seems to be the way they work, and you're wondering which one's going to take precedent, especially when you see that the purchase order T's and C's are far more onerous than the contract that you've tried to negotiate. So you've got to be very careful that there aren't contractual terms coming in through the back door in what you're trying to do as well. So there's a few examples of things that are either ridiculous or things that should make you sit back and think before you sign it, because I really do believe that with contracts, trying to seek forgiveness is never going to work after you've signed it.
Yeah. These were terrific examples, Adrian. Thank you so much. Just when you were talking, one that has caused me some problems in the past, or I've been asked to provide advice on it, it's where you have to carry out or confirm you've carried out employee background checks on all the employees who will be dealing with that client. And these can be like drug testing, police checks, whatever. And it may be possible to do that, let's say in the United States, but in Europe, where privacy law is so strong, it's absolutely impossible to deliver on that. So that's another one that we have to be careful about. And it falls into that category of it works in some countries, but in other countries, it's actually illegal. And you could be fined for delivering that part of the contract.
It's about as ridiculous, isn't it, as when you see an RFP come out asking for the CV of everybody who's going to be running a 100 cases a year contract for you, because you know they're always sitting around. Not a problem. I just pull them off the shelf, and that's the person who's available. You know, that's not a you know, it sort of quietly. I'm going to be a grumpy old man now, aren't I? But it is. Thanks, Stuart. You know, it really is crazy, isn't it, when you see some of this stuff. Anyway, please, Gordon, carry on.
Yeah, no, you're getting into full grump mode, Adrian. I hate to interrupt, but there are a few questions coming in. Actually, there's one right back to you, Martina, if I may. Somebody says, what is GQS Plus? We are aware of the GQS, but obviously this has a plus added on.
Okay, so yeah, global quality seal is okay, and we integrated the plus last year because the global quality seal standard is now available for relocation companies like the last 10 years. And we added companies who are related to the relocation business, like housing companies, intercultural training companies, and so on and so on. So since last year, they're able to get certified, so audited as well as certified with the Global Quality Seal Plus standard.
Right, excellent. And a question has come in. Oh, there's some very interesting questions now coming in, but what about this issue of how you review contracts And, we heard from Meredith at the beginning about, the joy of having a legal department behind you. But I'm thinking particularly if you don't, which applies to certainly most DSPs, and you have terms and conditions that come in as part of an RFP and you're asked to sign off on these, presumably you would never go out to a lawyer, it'd be too expensive. You've only got maybe a 1 in 3 chance of winning that business. Do you do it yourself? Do you have somebody in your team who specializes in it? Any tips on the best way of reviewing contracts cheaply but thoroughly?
I can take that one if you like.
Please.
Well, I've learned to read and as I mentioned, skim and try and find the points that are exciting and interesting. I even thought, Gordon, and it's kind of maybe it's dangerous to do this live, but it crossed my mind that maybe we could come up with a guide to a set of the kind of standard sections of a contract and what they mean, for focusing on the non-native speakers. Sort of, what does this section mean, and how, not to sort of say, oh, you don't have to worry about that, but what does it mean? And it may mean that then it simplifies the process for DSPs and other EuRA members in the future. I tend, as I said, I can't read the whole thing, so I tend to go through the sections I've learned that are likely to have things I'm going to get grumpy about in them. Yeah,
actually, that may tie in too with Meredith. You talked at the beginning about how your legal department created a contract snapshot, and maybe that is something that through EuRA we could help people focus on what matters. Presumably that works well but albeit it's internal to DwellWorks, Meredith?
Yeah, right now that's being used for DwellWorks. The other thing that we did, because sometimes we're the contracting party, or sometimes our client asks, we're happy to have our own MSA, Master Service Agreement, that we've drafted. We feel even better about that. It's, 15 pages long or something. But sometimes we're contracting with maybe a small DSP who's outsourcing business to us. And we know, again, they're not native speakers. A 15-page document might be overwhelming. So we actually just this year created a 1-page summary of terms and services. And then it has a link to the MSA. But like, if I can just read an excerpt, there's a part that says secrets. We may share secrets with one another. If we do share secrets, we each promise to hold the secrets in confidence. Each of us, really, mistakes. Mistakes happen. When they do, the mistake maker has to make it right. Just like very
That's
just
great.
Easy to understand, very simple language. And then again, the MSA gets into more detail behind it, but I think it just comes across in a little less overwhelming or daunting or off-putting kind of way.
Yeah.
Very good.
Question about going back when you're as a DSP, you're unhappy with a clause. I guess linked to that, would any of you ever walk away? Has there ever been a clause that's so bad that you've walked away? And related to that, have you ever wished you had walked away?
Who's going to take that, Steve? Or would you like me to?
Yeah, if you're ready, Adrian, crack on, yeah.
Go ahead.
So, yes, I've walked away from contracts. When you're in a partnership is it's two equals. Obviously, you like communism, one is more equal than another. But it is essential to be able to have the courage, I guess, of saying this is not working for my company, and to be able to walk away from something, because it's pointless being a busy fool. And that's what happens with some clients. One in particular who became more and more onerous in what they put on and kept changing to be more onerous. And that reached that point, although they were a significant client, was to say, this isn't working anymore. And I think you've got to do that with contracts. The local authority one I spoke about with the professional indemnity who wanted 10 million, for them, I walked away from that one. I would not get involved. simply because it wasn't worth it. And I think you just have to have that courage to do that sometimes. And it might seem like madness at the time, but actually, I promise you, it's sanity in the long run.
I think, Steve, did you have anything to add? Oh, sorry, Stuart.
Sorry, Gordon. I was just going to say that, yeah, it's a case of financial benefit to you. So how badly do I want this business versus the risk of the contract terms that I'm not happy with, and I can't negotiate and I can't change. And also then based on experience, I think the worst one I ever had was where performance was built into the contract. And so if there were complaints from assignees or and so on, we would be punished. But I couldn't get. Then I said, well, who's the arbiter of this? And that was a case where, and we knew the client, we'd worked with them before, and we're being invited to come back. Having known the nature of some of their assignees, we decided not to participate.
Yeah.
But again, I didn't need the business that badly. I was in that fortunate position. That's always the challenge.
It's almost like part of risk management then. You know, there's the benefit, there's the potential cost against it. Steve, anything you wanted to add on that topic?
No, I think very much in line with what Stuart has just mentioned. Yeah, you have to evaluate the situation. I really haven't had any contracts that haven't worked out for me in the past. I've had relationships that haven't worked out, and for me, that's probably more important. Is the relationship going to work? And sometimes when the relationship doesn't work, you do have to pull out of things.
Yeah,
that's my experience.
There are other questions there, but I'm conscious now of time. So perhaps just before returning to Simon, well, I'd just like to thank you guys for being such excellent speakers and sharing your advice and your views and in a very forthright manner on what is really a challenging topic. And I'm sure it's an issue we'll return to again when we're able to meet in person and we're able to exchange views with an audience there, and there'll be a lot of toing and froing. So thanks everyone, and back now to Simon.
Thank you, Gordon, and thank you to your panel, including the three grumpy men. And can I just say that Adrian was on top form as usual. It was just brilliant and very informative. And I think takeaways from that is I certainly think that EuRA could, via you, produce a snapshot of contractual terms that are extremely useful for our members to look out for, because it seems quite evident that a lot is going on in contracts that not always are being picked up, and we need to make sure that our members are fully au fait with what they need to be looking for. So thank you for that. That was a superb session. Now we move on now to Jeremy Berthoux from Home Console, who's going to ignite you with his inspirational session from Munich when we were last together.
Hello everyone. Today I want to tell you a story about a woman, a story about myself, a story about all of us really, and it's best summed up by the quote behind me. The woman's name is Sarah, the year 10,000 BCE, and Sarah is about to embark in a wonderful journey. She's on the move. It's been decided by her father that she would go out of the village to marry someone else. She's been accompanied by her uncle, her cousins, to go out and meet the new people that she will be a part of the family with. And I too felt like Sarah the first time I went to EuRA in Bartow back in 2015. So many faces, so many people I didn't know, so many things to learn about this new industry. But I had a head start with Sarah, as I seen the industry being built in the kitchen in my house by my mother, who founded the company I now run back in 1991. And it's only normal that Sarah and I would feel out of place, as it is encoded in our DNA that we are part of groups of no more than 150 people. Beyond that, it is impossible to form new meaningful bonds. So, still, as humans, we venture outside of our comfort zone, whether for food, for business, for family, human connection, and that's what makes us fundamentally humans. And this process of being integrated in new groups solely relies on the ability of the welcoming group to teach the ways of the clan, the rituals of the tribe, to welcome the new member. So Sarah goes through this process. She learns everything, and in one word, she's performing one of the first relocations in history. So Sarah, at the end of the process, is changed. She's part of a new culture, and by learning this culture, she's changing it, thus creating a third culture. And on a global scale, this small, simple process is really what made the success of the human race, bringing us on all 5 continents throughout a mere 200,000 years. Yet, today, as the landscape changed drastically, going from village to megacity, going from face-to-face interaction to digital interaction, we feel as lonely as ever, studies show. And this made me realize that as an industry, we have a tremendous opportunity in this most precarious time to be a positive force, to be the help the assignees that uproot themselves need. And the story obviously resonates with me personally. This is a photo at the end of EuRA in Bartow. And as you can see, I was welcomed very well. And the people, the lovely people of the EuRA family have been welcoming me. And I think it's only fair because we are the welcoming industry. So this made me realize that connecting the 2 dots of fundamental need for human connection and the place we have as an industry to be that link, to create that bond, makes a great sense of purpose, Eleanor, for us to be part of this industry. And it's no coincidence that this industry would be highly feminized, because there is a deep maternal care sense to what we do. It's perhaps something that all male industry can take a page from. And at the end, it was no surprise for me to find that there is actually a gene encoded in our DNA for mobility. So this is Sarah's journey. It's my journey, really. Perhaps it's your journey as well. And I'm incredibly thankful because as a millennial, I found purpose. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us. So my parting words will be proud, because you're part of a millennia-old industry that's encoded in our DNA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was it. Really was inspirational, and it goes to a great testament to the what the organisation is about, the EuRA family. I think that is the word. We welcome new members to our family. We engage with them, and we make them feel welcome at our conferences. And exactly the same will happen again next year in Sevilla. I'd just like to thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you had enjoyed the informative session on contracts. Tomorrow, you're going to be in the really safe hands of Irina Yakimenko, my colleague on the EuRA board. And until then, I look forward to seeing you all again in Seville. Cheerio. Bye-bye.